haven't had much practice since 1707.
Well,
so
they've had a lot of practice. They've had enough practice so that on day one of the Parliament they gave themselves a huge pay raise, voted themselves 17 weeks holiday a year, and incidentally they only work a day and a half a week. And then gave away 5,000 square miles of Scottish coastal seawater to England.
Not an auspicious beginning.
They're batting 0-0-0 at the moment, I would say.
But surely there's not yet an impulse to just send it back to London.
No.
I mean, they're
no,
your guys.
but you know, they're on a warning. I'll tell you when I knew I was actually doing something worthwhile was I was at a party just before I came out to the States. I mean, a big affair, and I got introduced to Donald Dewar, who is like our Prime Minister or Premier, the First Minister he's called. And it's Donald Dewar, this is Ian Rankin, and this guy says, yes, I know who he is. And that kind of tone, you just cannot put it across on paper, or I would try to do it. And I thought, good, something's niggling, something's getting home. You know, they can't just sit still, because they know. I mean, Edinburgh is like a village. You know, might be 400,000 people there, but you can't get away with anything without people finding out about it. And all these politicians, if they try anything sneaky or underhand, it's not just the journalists they've got to contend with, they've got to contend with the fiction writers as well.
But that's great material
Keeps
for you
them on
as a
their
crime
toes.
writer.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know.
Perfect
I
material.
mean, they're obviously, even if it's not the central focus of a book, you like writing books with interlocking parts anyway.
Yeah.
I thought Dead Souls was wonderful. It opens at the zoo, and you've got Rebus there for one purpose, and then he sees someone else up to no good. Was it the pedophile who was hanging around the children?
Yeah.
And he, in fact, goes too far, probably, chasing after him. And then you have the ghost from his past.
Yeah.
And you have the colleague who leapt off Salisbury Craigs to his death.
Did he do it?
Why?
Yep. And then we've got the killer who's been released after serving his sentence in the States and has come back. And there's a few scores to settle in Edinburgh. Yeah.
And a very nice twist at the end, I must say.
And these are all based. These are all based on real cases.
Are they?
We had a big paedophile trial in Edinburgh recently with a guy who'd been released into the community in Stirling, on a really rough housing estate in Stirling called the Raploch Estate. And the locals found out and set up a vigilante group, which is exactly what I do in my book. And we also had a few serial killers returned home. We're very good at exporting our serial killers. There was one sent back to us from Australia recently, having served his sentence. We've got 3 brothers who are going to be released from Canada, having served a life sentence for 30 years. They're going to be sent back to Scotland. They haven't lived in Scotland since they were pre-teens. They're now in their 40s and 50s. And we've got one sitting on death row in the States at the moment, who, if he gets off, will be sent back to Scotland.
Well, obviously you were fascinated with that because you structured your novel around.
Yeah.
What's the name? Wasn't he a Glasgow or an Edinburgh serial killer?
Well, no. I mean, he'd lived in Edinburgh for a short time before he went off to the States. And
no, I'm sorry.
Oh, you mean Bible John?
Yes.
Yeah, in Black and Blue. Yeah. Well, I mean that's the most famous case of an unsolved crime in Scotland's history. And I want to talk about how cops get obsessed with cases, and sometimes that obsession goes with them to the grave. Because I've met cops and I know that happens. And it's a fascinating kind of look at the interior life of a police officer, a good detective. Or is it a bad detective who can't let these cases go? And since the best real-life case was Bible John, I thought I'll use it. Of course, I was walking on moral eggshells because a lot of the victims' families were still around, still alive.
Right.
And he hadn't impacted on my life the way he had on theirs. So I was very careful about not naming names of victims and stuff like that.
Well, yes, you would have some privacy issues to deal with.
Yeah.
Also, did it make...
but you know that 2 weeks after I finished the book, the headline in the paper was "Police dig up Bible John," right? Because they thought they'd got a DNA fingerprint for the guy who'd done it. But he committed suicide in the 80s, so they dug him up and did a DNA test on his bones. And after 6 months, they worked out that it wasn't him.
So it's still unsolved?
Still unsolved. Thank goodness. Because in my book, he's alive and well and living in Scotland, you know.
Well, I mean, you were when you wrote it entitled to construct your own. I mean, it's fiction, you know.
Well, that's
create the world and construct.
But you know, I mean,
I
I had to be a real case because I was kind of following James Ellroy's dictum about using real life characters and cases and then spinning a web around them so that you get that suspension of disbelief in the reader. The reader knows that JFK was shot or knows that these gangster figures existed, so you start to believe the other little bits that are put in there. And I wanted to do that. And when I was having trouble because it turned out that Bible John might have been found, Lawrence Block wrote to me and said, just call your guy Testament Tom. Or Proverbs Pete or something. I said, no, I want it to be the real thing. It has to be the real case. And he said, well, I'm only offering suggestions.
that's a real tension, isn't it? Getting, you're basing it on something real that's known to people. You're setting it in a real place where people live. Because you want it to be about Edinburgh, you don't fictionalize Edinburgh any more than you can help.
You see, I used to. In the first 2 or 3 books, Rebus worked in a fictional police station on a fictional street. He drank in fictional pubs. And then everybody said, that's obviously there, that's obviously this, because it's a small geographic area. And if you're saying, he was in a police station on Leith Walk, everybody says, well, it's Gayfield Square, which is a real police station. And I got really miffed at that, so I thought, well, use the real city, use real streets, use real police station. He drinks in a real pub, the Oxford Bar, where I also drink. And I mean, that's great until, you might want to put something there that's a bit nasty, and then people get a bit kind of defensive about it. I mean, the cops in St Leonard's wouldn't like it if I had him beating somebody up in the cells, for example, because they would say they never do that. They don't mind the fact that my canteen is open different hours from their canteen, but if I start putting in, bad stuff happening in the cop shop. I took a TV crew back to Arden Street, which is where Rebus lives, which is where I lived as a student. And I was sitting in the front room and I just looked across the road and I thought that's where Rebus lives, right there. I took a TV crew back there recently for the BBC. I hadn't been back in years, and they said, so where does Rebus live? And I said, well, number 24 is here, that's where I was. So we go across the road and up 2 stories, and that's his apartment right there. They said, what, the one with the kind of pink curtains and the window boxes with the kind of blooms and things? Not Rebus's apartment, really, is it? So I'm going to have a word with the people who live there and say, you've got to get in on the, get in on the
adopt the start worse than noir, not in pink window curtains.
Absolutely.
Speaking of which, you were about to burst into film, right? Or Rebus is, rather. You and
not
Rebus
me.
together?
Not me.
What's going on?
Well, finally it's going to be made for television. They start filming next month. The first book they're doing is Black and Blue.
Oh, so this is real.
This
is way
this
past
is happening. It's happening. They've got the scripts and everything. It's going to be like Prime Suspect almost. It'll be 2 times 2 hours, I think, maybe 4 hours per book. They're going to do 1 or 2 a year, maximum. And the actor who's playing Rebus is John Hannah, who was in 4 Weddings and a Funeral. He read out the poem. He was in Sliding Doors. He's got a small part in The Mummy. More pertinently, he was in a TV series which I don't think you got over here called McCallum, where he played a Scots pathologist living in London and working in London. And that lasted a couple of series. So he's got a kind of certain darkness to him. He's young, he's 38, and of course Rebus lives in real time. In the first book, Rebus was 38, but now Rebus is 52. So I was a little bit hesitant about a 38-year-old actor. But in fact, I got no say in the casting, no say in the scripts. I haven't seen the scripts.
Oh, really?
I had 1 meeting with John Hannah. We had 1 business meeting. We started at 7 p.m., eating dinner in Edinburgh, and I staggered home at 5 a.m. That was a good meeting.
And you agreed to whatever?
Well, you can't really say. I mean, if they're going to screw it up, they'll screw it up. But they've got a decent budget. They've got some American money in there, so you will be getting it over here. It will be on in the spring in the UK, and you might get it here as early as next summer. It's going to be called Rebus, or Rebus, however you want to pronounce it.
I was going to ask you which it is. I call him Rebus.
I call him Rebus. I know some Americans call him Rebus, and the one person I've ever met called Rebus, R-E-B-U-S, pronounces it Rebus.
Oh,
so there are 2 Rebuses in Scotland. There's a guy called Joe Rebus and his son, and I met them 3 years ago. I met Joe 3 years ago, and I said I've never met anybody called Rebus before, and he said it's pronounced Rebus and it's got Polish roots. And that was the first thing you know, because a rebus is a picture puzzle. If you look in a dictionary, it means a picture puzzle. And that, in the first book, he's getting sent picture puzzles. And I was a kind of, smart-ass student. I thought, call him Mr. Picture Puzzle, basically.
What could be better for a crime novel?
Yeah, but the funny thing about Joe Rebus is that he lives in Rankin Drive in Edinburgh.
You're kidding.
No, there's 2 Rebuses in Scotland, and there's 2 roads in Edinburgh with Rankin in them, Rankin Road and Rankin Drive. And this Joe Rebus, if you look in the phone book, is in Rankin Drive.
That's one of those things, if you put it in
So
the book,
bizarre. Nobody would believe it.
Absolutely not. It'll be interesting to see whether they take Edinburgh, as the sort of dark world, well, the real world that Rebus polices, or whether they'll give it that slightly romantic gloss. If it's not made for American television specifically, you've got a better chance.
Well, I do worry about that because, of course, now that Morse is gone, because the last Morse book has been published and is being filmed, and that'll be the end of it. They're kind of starting to pitch Rebus as, the new Morse, which means they will tone it down. They will make it slightly more glamorous. Yeah.